What is up, fanatics? It is 8 p.m. Mountain Time, and that means another episode of Home Theater Fanatics Live. Tonight is episode 152, and we got another banger for you. So, today I've got an old friend joining us from a company that I just absolutely adore, and I'm one of many. And I'm talking about Michael Levy from Alta Audio. Michael, how are you, sir?
Just doing fine. How are you?
I thought I couldn't be any better until I started this episode, and now I'm better than I was before. So
Great.
I'm doing really good. Is exactly how I'm doing. I'm always excited to have you on the show because I mean, not only is the stuff that your company produces so awesome, you yourself, you're just this wealth of information. It just blows my mind every time we talk.
Well, thank you. Well, I didn't know, but I'm glad. What happens is I've been in this business and I've been designing speakers, frankly, from when I was 10 and professionally since 1980. So it's been a while. And you pick up and learn things that you don't even realize you have. It's just through experience, it becomes logical to you to do things a certain way.
I hear you. Yep. And so you were last on the show. It's been maybe a year and a half or something, right around that time frame. Man, time really flies. But for the folks that don't know you, let's take a minute. Maybe you can tell everybody a little bit about who Alta Audio is and who you are and why they should care.
Oh, all right. Why they should care is actually the first and most important thing. Why they should care is why I am here. Um, because I love music. I'm not, there's, I think, two different types of audiophiles. There's the audiophile whose system is the mechanics, the pieces that's in it. And I
Mhm.
mean, he's into the sound, but he's also very much into his latest amplifier, his latest thing, and looking for the next part to change it, to upgrade and all. Not that I disagree with that, except for one point, and that is the point of view. My point of view comes first from the music. All right. This began not as trying to create a new speaker, but trying to recreate an old sound. And that was the sound of live music. Now, it may sound strange. What are you talking about? Of course, the sound of live music. But music has changed through the years, through what's been happening, and electronics has been very much a part of changing what people expect to hear. And I go through the story of a friend of mine who just passed away this year. A great guy, Phil Schaff. I don't know if you remember him. He
Oh, I know the name.
great recording engineer, Grammy Award winning DJ. Used to be years ago the sound man for Dave Brubeck.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either until one time I had invited him over to my friend Mel Gross's house for one of our audiophile society meetings. And it was like, hey, I'm bringing a star. Everybody was really up to see him. And Phil is a great guy and very humble. But we got him talking. And at one point, he said to us, back then when I was the sound man for Dave Brubeck one day, when everybody decided that concerts had to get really loud. Remember, like back in 1969, when everything just turned up in volume tremendously? He said, Dave came to me after a concert and he said to me, Phil, you've got to turn it louder. It's just the way things are. I can't have you play it the way you are. Well, you know what I did? He said, the next day I packed up my gear and I started working for National Public Radio. And he said, simply because I would not be a part of destroying music. That is not music, it's an event. And there's a difference. What is music? And this is what, when you ask about the mission of Alta Audio, why we are different. It's the answer to the question is simple. To me, the glory of music is the day that you walked into your club, local club that you go into every now and then, and there's normally a group of players playing, and it's like that nice intimate sound. And that day, the best freaking artist, your favorite person on the planet, decided to sit 10 feet from you and just play his instrument. That's live music. Okay. And I've experienced it a few times. I've had that wonderful situation, and it is a feel and an emotion and a connection that is very different from electronic music. All right. Natural instruments do this thing. So that's where, when Alta began, we began, because I was challenged by a good friend to design a new speaker when I had been out of the business for a while. And I said to him, if I'm going to design a new speaker, we're going to have a completely different point of view, a new goal. And the goal was to get that feel, like you're there, like they're in front of you. And back then, as we began the company and did beta, testing of the designs and the concept, people like Phil Schatt were part of the listening beta testing, group. And Phil and, Anthony Kershaw, who at the time was conductor for Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Quite a few people who were tasked with listening to live sound and then going to listen to it on the speakers. And I said, if you can possibly get the recording of what you just heard, run home. Don't walk. Run. I want your memory fresh. And I said, and my definition of live is that if the power goes out, the concert goes on unchanged. Okay? No electronic instruments, nothing. So that was the basis of design. And that's what came up with the concept of designing a speaker with the speaker mathematics involved, not ignoring the history of tunings and systems that were brought to us by Teal and small Teal analysis back in the 70s. As a matter of fact, advancing upon them, using those calculations and going past them, all right? But also looking at it from the point of view of instruments and how they had been designed through the centuries. And one of the things I noticed is that there's no instrument that was ever designed that is a box. They all have shape to them, and their shape is integral to their sound. Nor is there any instrument I've ever seen that sounded better when you put padding in it, except maybe a bass drum. I can't think of anything else you would put padding in, and that ended up with what is the basis of the concept of the design and the difference in the sound, all right? Because taking the padding out created a linearity in response, because nothing was being absorbed, nothing was being taken out and lost. So you could play the speakers at 1 a.m. at a volume that wouldn't wake up anybody in the house, and they still sounded great. And then you could, that afternoon, turn them up so loud that you couldn't talk to the person next to you, and they still sounded great, and the dynamics were wide open, because there was nothing changing that linearity. And then, of course, the XTL design, which extended the bass to the low resonance of the woofer, and made it go through all the way down to feeling bass with control. Those two combined are why Alta speakers have a difference in their sound from other speakers. Now, what's been happening with Alta, what has happened over the last year?
It's been a crazy last year.
Oh boy. I was talking to dealers around the world, and their problem is that they're closed down. They can't have people come in. My dealer in Singapore has pictures of Alta speakers on the windows of the outside of his store, and inside he has all the speakers laid out and more things and he shows me and he says, but we're closed down, and he still manages to do business with people there, mostly directly, but the world has still not broken out of COVID, and it's made it very hard, especially for a new product, to get heard, to get seen, because people want to, obviously, for good reason, when you're going to buy a $5,000 or $10,000 item, get to listen to it in their
Mhm.
own environment. What we've been doing in the time in between is, when someone is not local to a dealer, not within 200 or so miles of a dealer who could help them, we ourselves deal with them directly, and we deal with the customer on a basis of a 100% refund policy, so that if the speaker doesn't work in their system, they just send it
They
back.
just send it back. Yeah.
You know, not every room is the same, and it reminds me of the situation years ago when I had a pair of our Hestias, which are, had been raved about time and time again. And I had a dealer who called me and said, "You're sounding horrible." And I went down to see him and had him pack them up and ship them back, because they simply would not work in his room. It was just the kind of room. We live in a three-dimensional reality, and a speaker is integral to the room. One of the things that always drove me crazy in speaker design is, everything's based on this concept of the anechoic room. You know,
Right. Yep.
Look,
All the measurements.
all measurements are done in an anechoic room. When's the last time you went to listen to a concert in an anechoic room?
Never.
Have you ever been in an anechoic room? Do you know how bad
Mm.
they sound? Oh my God, it's like, it is the most horrendous sound you have ever heard. Just when I began this business, my first speaker company back in the 80s, Pentagram loudspeaker, the Consumer Electronics Show was in Chicago. And we drove out one time, and had set up a room in what's called live end, dead end back then, where the everything behind the speakers was damp, and everything in front of the speakers was allowed to have reflected sound. I learned a lot more about how to set up a room since then, but that was the concept that was going around at that point in time. Anyway, the key to the story is that we had a van that we had everything in, and on the way back, we were driving back, and I sat in the back row with all of the Sonex foam around me as the van was driving, and I was trying to talk to the people in the front and listen to maybe the radio playing the music, and it was like torture. I think they could use it as a torture method.
That's funny.
Imagine if you could scream as loud as you wanted to and you heard nothing. Okay, that's what it was like. All right, you could only hear yourself coming out of your own mouth, no reflections at all, and it's the most unnatural sound there is. So why on earth do we use anechoic rooms as our reference? It makes no sense. It only makes sense mathematically. Okay, it's an easy
Hmm.
reference, because otherwise, what am I supposed to use? And my answer is that each one of my speakers is designed to work in a different size room to some degree. I mean, you could put the Alyssa in a room that would be smaller than you could put the Alec in, and the Alec can play in a room up until a pretty large size. And after that, I think you would need, either our new three-way that's coming or the Hestias. But sound is very much realization that you are dealing in a real environment, three-dimensional. You live in a fluid called air, and this is, and not only that, you have to understand it from the point of view of how a human ear hears. One of the things that gets me, for example, is when people show me graphs from a microphone, and there are certain frequencies where they are valid. There are certain things that they are good for knowing. But if you don't understand the difference between how a microphone hears and how a human ear hears, you can make some really great mistakes. I mean, like, for example, most of us, when we're doing graphs of loudspeakers in a real environment, we will not use anything below approximately 300 cycles, because we know that that's where the room interactions are going to give you dips and rises, and depending upon your position and the ceiling
Sure. Yeah.
and so, for those frequencies, we do is we use close mic measurement of the motion of the woofer and decide that whatever happens in the room is just what happens. All right. And then, of course, the last part is slightly important. We listen to it. You know, that's one of the things that's so integral, and yet you find so often is left out of the engineering analysis. All right, and most important thing is to listen to what you're doing. I could create bass of the same frequency in many different ways. All right, for example, but the way that bass is created using the XTL has a much more natural sound, and I cannot tell you why, because I can computationally make the same supposed response, and it won't sound the same using a passive radiator, say, for example, um, instead of a transmission line. All right.
Right, and I think it's good to clarify that for everybody. XTL, they might not know what that's referring to, and
All right.
but that's your
So
version of a transmission line.
XTL bass is our patent pending method of tuning bass in the cabinet, in which we use a hybrid transmission line and port as the system. What happens is the speaker operates as a ported speaker would from resonance frequency on up, which the response is very smooth and very well controlled. The problem with most tuned port systems is that below resonance, they completely lose coupling to the woofer. The woofer moves without creating sound.
Oh yeah, they completely underload beneath that frequency. Yeah.
Right, and so you know, especially if you ever put on a warped record on a turntable and you see the woofer going like this, and it's like it just moves and no sound, nothing, and it's moving like crazy, and you're saying to yourself, well, what happened to all that energy? And the answer is it is decoupled. What's called impedance matching has stopped happening. All right, now when I looked at it, I said, what a waste, and that was one of the questions that I had asked Teal and Small when I met them. Why don't we do anything with this energy? And I realized that there was one system that did that, and that is the transmission line. But up to the point in time that I started playing with it, the design of a transmission line was based on the concept of basically creating a 1/4 length of resonant frequency tube that was padded to prevent the other resonances from predominating and letting the woofer therefore get extended below resonance. It worked in that it got you the deep bass, but all the padding made the bass sound muffled and you had loss of dynamic range. So I looked at it from a completely different point of view and integrated it with the tuned port. So the XTL system basically mechanically crosses over at resonance from being a tuned port to being a transmission line. And that transmission line extends the response down well below resonance and does not allow the woofer to decouple, thus both increasing bass response to much lower frequencies and increasing power handling of the speaker greatly, since the woofer is no longer moving freely without any impedance.
You know, you'll probably roll your eyes and reach through the screen and give me a little slap when I say this, but it would be interesting because, I swim in a lot of different lanes as far as audio is concerned, right? So, I interact and talk with two-channel audiophile folks, but I also swim in the multi-channel world for people that build home theaters for watching movies and that kind of stuff. And the question that everybody always deals with is, I want to get my subwoofers and I want to have that really low bass, but I want to be able to have, smooth response, and I want it to sound good too. And, they're like bass reflex or sealed, or do I do bass reflex, but use passive radiators, or do I do ports? You know what would be interesting? And I don't even know if this is feasible or not, but imagine a 12 or a 15-inch subwoofer. That's it. But in your hybrid,
Don't just imagine it, okay?
That's what I want to see one day.
We have already in prototype a set of 10-inch. Now the thing is, you say, oh, just 10. But remember what I told you before, and what's different is that my 10-inch will outdo anybody's 15-inch. It's not even close. All right. And what I call it, and I have it in prototype, and I've shown it to people here with people's jaws practically slapping the floor when they heard it, because it has this power of, and with clarity, no fuzz at all, but the ability, like, when you're listening to somebody playing a stand-up bass and you feel him touch the string as
Yeah.
he's plucking it, okay? And it goes right through you. When you add this, it just does that. And then they are flat to 14 hertz. And
Okay.
when I say
That's
flat,
crazy for a
I
10-inch
mean
driver.
flat, all right? And they will do it with so much power that it could literally make you sick if you wanted to. I mean, it would just be too much.
14 hertz can definitely get you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's, I mean, I would, when you
So
get close to that, let
I,
me
I,
know.
I just want to finish. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, because I'm very excited about this product, and this is
yeah.
coming. But the thing about it is, for home theater systems, this is, I call it an ISD. It is, the way that you would use it is, you would use Alta speakers everywhere else and drive them full range. Do not cross them over. They do not
Mhm.
need to be crossed over. All right. And then you have the LFE output that is standardly there in a surround processed system, which will play only in home theater mode and will not disturb or alter your musical sound. All right.
Mhm.
Because frankly, if your system is set up properly and the speakers are matched properly for music, you will not want the LFE most of the time.
Mhm.
Or, I mean, yeah, up to the person. There are some people who may want it because there are certain effects that are very nice, but the truth is that musically they're correct without it. All right, with it it's just a little more.
Right.
But you have that ability in those processors to decide to turn it on or off at any time. The point is, if you use it as your LFE, when those movie deep bass explosions happen, they will not be that rumble that you hear out of subwoofers. They will be that whoom that you would hear out of live action explosions.
Right, the real deal.
We were playing the Telarc 1812 Overture,
Oh,
which
I know that very well. It's one of my favorites. I love it. With the
everybody.
cannons.
I tell the story of the day that they delivered that to the Las Vegas show. I think it was 1983.
Mhm.
That they delivered both the vinyl and the new CD. It was a
Right.
CD that had just come out of the 1812 Overture, and the first pressing of it, the cannon were on there so powerfully that almost everyone, including my VPI turntable with Koetsu on it, when they hit it just jumped out of the groove and went straight to the end of the record. Okay,
Yep.
didn't even bother playing the next thing. It jumped straight to the center of the record. It was that wild little thing. But a couple of people had Shure V15 Type 5s, which can play outrageously high dynamics with, say, a Rabco linear tracking arm, and it actually handled it. It played it. So there were a couple of people who had to call their factories to ship woofers in real quick, because woofers literally blew out of the cabinet. And I mean it. I went into one guy's room and there was the woofer stuck out of the magnet. It had blown out so far it couldn't get back in. Okay.
Mechanical failure. Love it.
So they lowered it when they put it onto the. It's an SACD,
Right.
and I played it on these subwoofers recently. And as I'm playing it, on come the cannon. And when the cannon hit, I looked down at my pants and they were moving with each shot.
Love it.
The speakers were 10 feet away.
Love it.
Okay. That's the only way I can explain to you what these are capable of doing. And yes, there will be versions that will be larger. I am going to use this concept to design a series of incredible subwoofers. All right. But I'm going to call them ISDs, infrasonic devices, because the way I think that sound should be done and the way that it should be used is that your speakers should be full range. They shouldn't need a subwoofer, all right? And that the ISD should just bring in the feeling part of the bass without adding any textural difference. It should sonically be the same, but it should have a tactile difference. It should feel a
Right.
little more real and
Right.
powerful. And that's exactly what they do and what they're going to do. So, yeah, you just made me, introduce a product that I have in prototype and not ready to actually show yet. But those who have heard it agree that we've got to get it out. So, it's one of those things where I've got to figure out format, exactly how to do it. I don't like the idea of using plate amplifiers or internal amplifiers. My marketing people are all saying to me, that's how you got to do it. That's the way you do a subwoofer. Everybody wants to just simply plug into it and it has the power and everything. And what it is that the cabinetry gets to be not exactly the way I want it to tune
Oh,
exactly.
yeah, there's sometimes compromises made when you have to figure out, how am I gonna take this thing, and it's this deep, and we shove it in there, and yeah.
Exactly. And what I have as the prototype is basically a 24 dB per octave Linguist Riley crossover
Mhm.
and biamp and set up at 55 hertz, and that's it. It's a very simple setup, all right. But it's all external, and you can choose your own amplifier and match it better that way. And I feel that it is a better system and a better way for an audiophile to be working this. And it's not going to be an inexpensive product. And I think it's probably the way that that I'm going to decide we're going to go in the end, and that is that you will have an external crossover, a separate amplifier, and power it. And it also means that if you're using it in a surround sound system as an LFE, all you do is add an amplifier and connect it directly, because
Mhm.
the LFE needs no crossover at
Right,
all.
it's already done in the processor.
It's
Yeah,
already done in the processor, so you just
yeah.
run it
So,
direct.
just a few comments on this, because this is something that people have talked to me about quite a bit. So, when you think about designing a multi-channel, system, you know, there is there's a pretty big gulf between what has evolved into the way that most people build their home theaters. And when I say most people, I mean not the very expensive, you're bringing in external consultants that, are sound engineers and that kind of stuff, but somebody goes to a store and they buy a AVR and they buy some speakers and subwoofers. And most of the time folks are like, okay, I have my speakers and everything's crossed over at 80-ish hertz, and all of that 80 down is dumped into the subwoofer along with the LFE channel. Now, what really opened up my eyes is because I'd kind of been in that world for a long time, but as I kind of opened up a little bit and started going to mixing studios and going into screening rooms where theater, production companies come to test their movies and see how they sound and see what it would be like in real world environments. I talked to the folks that built those environments, and I'm like, well, what do you cross over at? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, how low do your speakers, all your mains? They're like, oh, they're all full range. Like you don't build a system that doesn't have full range speakers everywhere. I'm like, well, you're front and center. They're all full range, and then you have subwoofers for the LFE channel, and you don't mix it all up. You just have to know what you're doing. And so there's a gulf there between kind of what the
What is
pro
being
stuff is.
done and what should be done precisely, and how it was produced. But not only that, guess what? That also, as far as using a surround sound system to play music, this is where we've been messing it up. because for music, especially when you cross over at 80 hertz, there's a discontinuity that is created that loses the sound. And the thing that I found out is that we can make a surround sound system that is glorious playing movies and fantastic playing sound.
Right. Right.
And it's like I got to tell you a few recordings. The other day, my son called me and said, "Oh, today I'm going out and we're going to go and watch the Nutcracker at the Lincoln
Lincoln
Center,
Center.
right?" And so when he said that, I said, "That's great." And I looked online and on YouTube, I found an 11-year-old recording of the same exact group produced
Hmm.
doing the same exact performance. And I put it on my system, and I played it only in 2 channel. And honestly, if I had played it in surround, the only thing it could have done for me is when the applause came, I would have felt like I was sitting in the audience for the applause.
Right.
When the sound came on, and I dropped my big screen behind me here, and you see my 84, but we can drop 125. So I dropped the 125 inch screen, and I'm playing this thing, and I'm going, you know what? I've got better sound than they have, unless I don't know. Even if he's sitting in the best seat in place, I don't know if his sound could be as good as what I. You got to play. You have got to play this recording. It's that well
That good.
recorded. It's, I mean, sweet, dimension, detailed, palpable, and it has video.
Right.
And now, one of the things that I found, for example, and I don't know if this occurred to you when you were testing our speakers yourself on your
Hmm.
theater system, we really don't need center channels most of the time. All right. The center channel, especially with my speakers, which have an incredibly wide window where they image, um, very rarely adds. It usually at best is good when the screen is just so large that the speakers can't be put in the right position to image. But even as wide apart as 8 or 10 feet, they still center image very well, even when you sit to the side of one of them. The image doesn't shift, which is what it should do. So we have a center channel that's designed at the Hestia level. I have one that we're working on for the Alyssa level. But the truth is, if you were to take 5 Alyssas, you could use it that way. And yet, I would say that most of the time, if you just phantom the center channel, no one would ever know.
When I had your speakers, and so I had a pair. If those are Alex that are right beside you,
Yep.
they were the same color, and I had them for maybe a month, maybe a little bit more, and they were absolutely glorious. I mean, I love them, and if I remember correctly, that's an 8-inch bass driver,
Right.
and I mean, it was thunderous, right? Really, really enjoyed it, but what I always wanted to do is I wanted to experience what would it be like to have 5 of these, right?
Mhm.
And then one of your not yet in existence subwoofers, right?
Mhm.
And just see what that would I think that would be
It's it's
yeah, that would
coming.
be good.
It's coming. Uh, the Look, the Hestia level system is for the really outrageous. When we're talking about a set channel that's 20,000.
That's pretty outrageous, yeah.
But the the Alyssa level, should I say, will match with both the Alec and the Alyssa. So it's not a problem with it, and its price point is going to be such that I think about 3,500, 4,000 for the center channel at most. All right.
Mhm.
So it's not going to be outrageous, and the subwoofers, as I was discussing, used as LFEs. uh, It's a different sound. What it is it's so much more natural, and yet even like I said, when you're playing theater on it, the power just sounds more real. It sounds more like things are actually happening rather than it being played on a speaker. You know,
Right.
Um,
I understand.
but when you play music, it is so you're you are there in the audience type of a sound, and then you've got the screen in front of you too. It's transformation, and so I'm really that's where we're going in the future, and I'm glad that you were thinking that way. Yes, we're thinking that way too. It's a matter of what it takes to do product right. Everybody wants to have everything right away. We just got new speaker stands for the Ulysses. It took me 7 months to work out the design and have
Mhm.
it built and have it ready. And that's the fastest I've ever done any product because it was just the stand. The details involved in getting things exactly right are, of course, what makes all the difference.
Oh, yeah.
But
It's
we,
always the detail.
you know, but we are in prototype mode, and what we're seeing in prototype, we're very excited.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to call out, and it's still in the same vein of what we were talking about around subwoofers and home theater, is I think this solves for me what one of my fundamental mental dissonance issues is, right? So if you think about bass reflex, right, ported designs,
Mhm.
for the most part, people want to leverage that design because at port tuning and higher, you get a lot of output. Right now, the downfall is underneath port tuning. The sub kind of unloads and it goes a little nuts. So you end up putting like a high pass filter really down low, at 20 hertz or something to help control things down. But you lose the capability that you have in a seal driver, which has like a 12 decibel slope, kind of natural roll off or whatever that is, so they can kind of naturally get a little bit deeper, but you lose all of that extra output that you gain in the ported or the bass reflex design.
It's more than that, actually. You see, the seal design involves a lot of non-linearity. All right. What's great about the ported design is that from resonance on up, not only is it higher efficiency, but
Mhm.
it's also very linear, especially if there's nothing in there to absorb, sound. It has very linear response. So I think what you're saying is very true. The problem is even when you cross over, even when you filter out the infrasonic, it doesn't sound right. All right, it
Sure.
doesn't. It doesn't have what you need there. That's what the whole idea of XTL is about. The truth is that XTL is still responding, even though I rate them in an anechoic room because that's the reference. So they're
Sure.
rated to 32 hertz in an anechoic room. When you put them in a standard room, and I've had people graph them several times, and you look and you go, "There's still 0 dB at 20 hertz," and I go, "Uh huh," you know,
Right.
because that's what they were tuned for, a real room, not an anechoic room. And that's
Understood.
where and that's where and that's that ability to go to that frequency, um, is what makes it feel right, make it feel real. That's strictly feeling based. The truth is between 30 and 20, as the closer you get to 20, the more it's feeling. The 30, it's pretty much 50-50, and down
Right.
around 20, it's pretty much all feeling. Below that, it's strictly feeling. And
Strictly feeling.
oh, I remember one time playing Carmina Burana, I think it was, that has the organ note at 16 hertz, and everyone was saying the speakers aren't playing it. I said, really? Take out your phones and put them on, a graphic analyzer, and they put it on, and there was this single note there at 16 hertz sitting there. When it was playing, you couldn't hear it or feel it at all in the room because simply the room wasn't big enough for it to resonate. It was being killed,
Sure.
and you know it's very hard to. You're not going to hear it. It's not easy to feel that either.
Right on. So I do want to talk about it. I mean, we've already burned 40 minutes, man. This is going really fast. But I want to make sure you get to tell the story about the company and some new products and things like that that are coming up. So
So
Let's kind of flip over to what's going to be. So what, we've talked about kind of the products that you've had and, philosophy and a bunch of stuff, but looking forward, what is going to be new for Alta Audio? What should people be looking for?
Axpona, we are going to premiere our new three-way speaker, unnamed as yet. It will
At Axpona?
by Axpona. I have
April.
Yes, and I have the prototypes. We're in the process right now of doing the very fine tuning that will make the final, tuning of the crossovers. But the prototypes are, we have them in all these beautiful finishes, and they look gorgeous, and they're sounding fantastic already. But when I'm finished polishing them, I'm really excited to and that's what I call when I fine tune, it's polishing.
Right.
What it's going to sound like at that point in time, and I think that is because imagine what the ALEC could do, and some. In other words, as powerful as the ALEC is in the bass, and some, because
Right.
This will go even deeper with more power and control. As open as the mid range is, and with more dynamic and more intimate clarity, and the high end, the extension with more dynamics, and I say to myself, it's like you're listening to the ALEC and you're saying, how do you do, and yet when you do the comparison, you hear the difference. We start from something that's really, really good and get better. That's why I'm very excited about that product. What's following after that is what is in prototype right now, the LFE, the low frequency output device, our infrasonic devices, I call it ISD, which is, I think, going to really open eyes as far as how bass should actually be. What it does, until you hear it, you don't understand, and when you hear and feel it, then you get it immediately. It makes sound so much more intimate. So it makes you so much more a part of it, and yet doesn't destroy its character at the same time. It doesn't have any signature of its own. It just simply adds power.
So, one comment around bass, and one thing that I've struggled with personally a lot is I will listen to different systems, system A, system B, whether it's 2-channel or multi-channel or whatever it is. And, when I hear the bass, some systems I'll say, that doesn't sound right to me. I don't know what it is. It doesn't sound right. And I'll listen to another and say, oh, that sounds more right, and I don't know how to articulate that. And I have conversations with people and they're like, it's all the same. It's just a subwoofer. They're not different. They just play notes and they're all the same. And I'm like, no, they sound different to me. And some sound right and some don't sound right, but I don't know how to articulate that. And I don't know how to describe what that difference is. But when I hear something that sounds right, I know that it's right, or at least closer to right. But that's a challenge that I've had, and people, I think, discount my point of view, and they're like, no, they're all the same, but I really don't think they are.
Very, very different, and I think crucial. I have had times, there are very few subwoofers that people, since we don't manufacture one yet, I have had customers who bought a pair of our speakers and put subwoofers on, and it's been a rare situation where they left them on, because very often they blurred the bass and added distortion at the same time. And what is that about? It really is that when you get to those bottom notes, the linearity and control must be incredibly well done. You can't have dynamic differences between what your subwoofer is doing and your main speaker is doing. They have to move with the same speed and control. All right, and that's a factor that we in engineering call Q. But it's also very much a matter of how you do the tuning into the cabinet, and the way that you do the crossover, so that it will then properly disappear into the sound. And there are major differences. You know, a lot of the subwoofers that I've heard to me sound both one note in that they have a resonant frequency that predominates.
Oh yeah, so they're super loud at 42 hertz or whatever, or 37 or whatever it happens to be. Yeah.
Right. And then at the same time, not well controlled in that when you turn them on, stuff above the frequencies they're playing gets blurred by their nonlinearities not matching up, you know? So, yes, I hear exactly the same thing you hear. But the reason and that's why, for example, I decided to have on the subwoofers separate amplifier, separate crossover, because that matching is as critical as sometimes you need to change the amplifier to match the amplifier you're using better on your driver for your, full range.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's we think, hey, it's only playing down at these frequencies that are 50 foot long. How can that make a difference? But once again, you're looking at it like it's two-dimensional, and you're not understanding what happens with the interaction of one frequency with another frequency. And the best way to understand it is go to your local swimming pool, sit in there, and flap your hands at different frequencies and look at the waves and what they do on the water. All right?
Mm-hmm.
That in a more complex three-dimensional form, in a fluid that also compresses, which liquid does not do, is what's happening when you're
Yeah,
listening
if you
to the sound.
swim down where you're covered around with water everywhere and then do it, then you have that. Yeah, it's very
It,
complex.
that again, that makes it one more dimension complex. And then when you add compressibility, that's another dimension that you're actually adding to
Mm-hmm.
what is happening. And you have to look at it that way. And when you look at it that way, you realize that what's happening down at 20 hertz affects what's happening at 200 hertz. All right. It all has to happen together because the interference pattern is something your ears will pick up, because we don't hear like microphones. We hear the way human ears hear. And you think about it, the cochlea with the cilia, with all these different nerves that each one of them responds to a particular impulse frequency. So it's not sine waves that we hear, it's impulses that we hear. And that's how we pick up differences in phase and timing, and thus are able to sonically locate. You know this, all audiophiles do this. You sit there and you close your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You got a really good recording. And as good as the imaging was with your eyes open, suddenly it is 10 times better, because you no longer have the visual to get in the way. And you
Right.
hear the space that the thing was recorded in and where the instruments are and everything. That sonic location is something that we evolved through the eons as, little mice or whatever we were back then, in order to save our lives, because it could tell us where the predator was and which way to run and how big the space we were in was.
Yeah, and that's the magic. When you sit down, you close your eyes, and the speakers aren't there anymore, and it's just
Right.
you're where you were or where the recording was done, and you're there and transported. That's magical.
To achieve that magic needs to understand how the human ear does that. And that's why I go to that, that scenario of understanding the the need to be able to image properly as a survival method. And then when you sit there and allow it to be a method of enjoyment, you close your eyes and you're suddenly transformed to something else, and you go into a slight trance, and all of your daily worries go away. Oh, I've heard this from friends of mine. Michael, I just got home from a vacation. I was away for 2 weeks, had a great time. And the first thing I did when I got home was turn the system on and play it because I needed it, And it's one of those things that it's a beautiful addiction. It's like I don't mind addicting anybody to music. It's a wonderful thing I'm doing.
I agree 100%. And speaking of wonderful things that you're doing, you coming on the show is wonderful, and I really appreciate it. We're almost out of time though. So, is there anything else that you want to bring up for the folks that are listening tonight before we say adieu?
Not really. Beyond the point that um, I really would like them to get the chance to get a listen to the the sound that is the difference from the concept that we have of what design should be. And it's something that we can all talk about all day long. It makes no difference. When you sit and you hear it, you'll understand. And that's all I can say.
I agree in it, and you don't know until you've heard it, and then you understand. But you can't know until you experience it. At least that was my point of view, because until I experienced it, I didn't even conceive of what it was really like. So I agree, and I think everyone should hear that. And it sounds like if they want to get a taste of that, maybe Expona would be the right
Oh, that
place to.
would be absolutely
Yeah.
a great place. We're going to have 3 different display rooms there, and
Wow.
so welcome by. We will be there with Frank Van Alstyne. We will be there with Krell, and we will be there with Invigo. Infigo. Um, and Infigo is the amplifier company that we did the Capital Audio Fest with, and their amplifier and D-to-A summed up to $87,000, and they're sitting on them were my poor little $10,000 Alec, you know. So I don't know if you know Andrew Quint. He writes for the Absolute Sound, and he came in and he sat down and he was listening to the system, and he said to me, "This doesn't add up." And he's literally got like a piece of
Doing the math.
and doing the math, and he says to me, $10,000 speakers, and I said, "Take a listen." Well, afterwards, he gave them a Best Value Award at the show.
Yeah. And they are a wonderful value. I know a lot of people will say 10 grand, that's a lot of money. Well, you get what you pay for. And this is a real bargain. I mean, really, really, really. All right.
Thank you, and thank everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Michael, for coming on. I look forward to having you on again hopefully it's not another year and a half before we get an opportunity to speak again. And if it's within my power, I plan to be at Expona this year. Only time will tell, but that's my goal.
I look forward to seeing you there, and we'll have some fun, and maybe we'll do a little late night listening to the new 3-way.
I would appreciate that. Thank you so much.
That'll be great.
All right. Take care, sir. I'll see you soon.
Too. Bye now.
All right, folks. When Michael's on, it's always wonderful because he is such a font of information, and it's just stunning. I think I'm going to take this episode and maybe edit it down, and and have a little small side edit called the Subwoofer Masterclass with Michael Levy or something like that, because it's always so good. I'm so glad he was on to talk about that with us tonight. And if you don't know the company, you really need to go check out their website. It's down below in the notes, and you can go check it out. And to go back and talk about a couple of things. So Joey had mentioned using the M8 to power the speakers. And I think I did a video where I took the M8 and I bridged it down to 4-channel and then bi-amped the Alex with a pair of those with an 8-channel amplifier, which was kind of cool. And it sounded awesome. And Mike, I'm sure you would absolutely want to see that XLT. I mean, I think that would be right down your alley. But just for everybody that's in the audience, I see Joey and I see Mike and Double A's here, and I think this was a great episode for him. Alta Audio and Double A. My Mail's here, and GB 1963B is with us. I think I saw Kevin Sorkin jump in for a while. scroll way up. There's a lot of people. Adam was here. So Adam, thanks for dropping by to see the show. And so Adam Somer, if you guys don't know him, he's actually the gentleman that introduced me to Alta Audio and Michael, which was awesome, and I can't thank him enough for that. But I think at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close this one up for the night, everybody. As always, your time is valuable, so thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I always appreciate it. So make sure to like and subscribe and do all that stuff. And remember, there are 2 channels where this video hangs out: Home Theater Fanatics Live, HTF Live. Go find that one and subscribe, because that is where things live in perpetuity. Again, thanks. See you guys in the next one.